I don't believe these things. They seem very strange. And Peter steps in and says, well, surely Jesus didn't love a woman more than us. And at this point, Mary cries. I always wish she wouldn't do that, but she does. And says, Peter, do you think I made all this up?
But those scholars who think these Gnostic Gospels were written at least a century after Jesus say you can't rely on them to provide real information.
Let's not romanticize these Apocrypha. Some of these Apocrypha tell stories of Jesus' childhood. What was Jesus like as a kid? Well, they have Jesus picking up, little pieces of clay and then turning them into birds, or striking his playmates dead if he lost in a game of hopscotch or something. In other words, using his, quote, divine powers.
Come on, they wrote about that?
That's the point. I mean, the same body of literature has a lot of this silly stuff about Jesus and Jesus the brat, using his divine powers to terrorize and to dominate his playmates.
All of the Gospels are part of a bigger picture. I don't think anybody can say, I believe these Gospels or these Gospels. By nature of the fact that they are oral histories, none is going to be perfectly complete. None is going to be perfectly accurate. They're all critical pieces of the puzzle, a puzzle that we now have more pieces to and is starting to make more sense as a whole. And by putting all the pieces together, I think we get a much clearer image of who Mary Magdalene was.
As we have said, we found that Brown is correct, that there were writings suppressed by the early church. Prominent academics agree that in the early centuries of Christianity, there were many different groups calling themselves Christian, with radically different points of view.
We know that in the early communities there were dozens of writings circulating, not 4 Gospels, but many, many more.
And they do say that the church suppressed the so-called Gospels or religious writings of groups that did not adhere to what they called orthodox doctrines.
Within 350 years after the death of Jesus, becoming a Christian, not according to the doctrines laid down by the church and the creed and condoned by the emperor and the bishops, could be seen as possibly a crime.
Just as today, in the early centuries of Christianity, religion and politics were intimately related, and those in power used it to do what they thought was God's will.
Books like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and many others were burned and destroyed. I mean, virtually all copies of that.
However, no scholar we spoke to believed the church suppressed these Gospels because they contained a secret about a marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The truth is far more complicated, an argument over theological doctrines.
There was deliberate suppression of this material by leaders of the church back then and ever since, because there's certain kind of material that some church authorities have thought is not good for their congregations from their point of view.
The Gnostics are the ones who lost out in the battle for Christianity. What we've come to realize with the discovery of a whole new range of texts from Egypt is how incredibly diverse early Christianity was, much, much more so than we ever thought.
Mary plays a significant role in many of them.
Well, the role of Mary Magdalene in the Gospel of Mary is more prominent than it is, for example, in the New Testament Gospels. The tradition that there was a special relationship between Jesus and Mary is very ancient. This is certainly one of the things that the new literature that we've discovered in Egypt shows us. We see her called the most beloved woman of Jesus. We hear her called the most beloved disciple.
And there is evidence, even outside the Gnostic Gospels, that in the first centuries after Jesus, Mary Magdalene was treated with great respect by several of the early church leaders who were men.
You don't need to go to the Gnostic Gospels in order to find a high view of Mary and a praise of her for her faith. For instance, an early Christian father will make the claim that she is the apostle to the apostles. Another will declare that she is the tower of faith.
I think, again, I'll go back. I'm stubborn. I'll go back to my point. Mary Magdalene's importance is already made clear in the New Testament that we do have. I can't think of anything more important to situate Mary Magdalene in the big picture as an important person in Christianity than the fact that she was in 3 accounts of the resurrection. She was the primary witness of the resurrection, even above Peter.
But many scholars told us that Mary Magdalene becomes less and less important in church writings, and she is replaced by Mary, the mother of Jesus. So what happened? One explanation is that she was a victim of a power struggle over the role of women in the church 100 years after Jesus. One bishop in southern France writes that he is enraged at groups that allow women to participate in giving communion, for example.
There's a battle going on, and in our texts of the 2nd century, we can see it laid out. Mary Magdalene was clearly privileged. To any male-dominated hierarchy, this is dangerous, of course, because there comes also the attraction and the appeal of women. Are they seducers, or are they the route to insight? Should we be close to them, or should we stay clear of them? Very tense, very tense.
What you find about the year 150 or the year 200 is the systematic exclusion of women from any positions where they would be visible, where they would speak out, where they would have roles of authority.
That effort to marginalize women may be why Mary Magdalene diminished in importance over the years.
I think it's very likely that it was deliberate. I think the charge that she was a prostitute is an excellent way of refuting the claim that she is a specially revered apostle and teacher.
As historians, we can't really say what people's motives were. What we can do is we can look at the effects. And the effects were clearly to undermine women's authority in the church.
Our history books have been written by the winners, those societies or those individuals who have conquered and survived.
Every picture, every stained glass window from infancy onwards, there is Jesus in a white robe and long hair and a beard, standing by himself, surrounded at a modest and gracious distance by 12 men. How different it would be if our image of Jesus needed instead to be of Jesus with a wife and with children around him. What difference would it make? Well, it would certainly reopen the question, what does the church think about sex?
Christianity has had a very unhealthy attitude to sexuality. And had Jesus been married, and I'm not discounting the possibility, but if we had clear evidence that he was married and even that he had a family, that would have knocked out of the box all this nonsense that has been part and parcel of the Christian tradition, small t, for so many centuries, that somehow sex is not so nice.
Why do you think your book has touched such a nerve?
The mysteries of spirituality, the Holy Grail, the origins of our religions, these are topics that resonate at a deep, deep spiritual level, really at the core of the human psyche. And whether or not, whether you agree or disagree with the topics, they're on the table, and we're talking about them. And these are topics that for centuries have been taboo.
But you get talking only about Mary Magdalene and Jesus and sex, you lose I think the more important and historically important point that here 20 centuries ago we had a great religious leader named Jesus of Nazareth who broke through the barriers of cultural bias and had among his disciples and closest friends women who didn't just, go around getting the tea and sweeping up after the boys left. She really was every bit as much an apostle, a companion spokesperson for Jesus and his gospel as any of the men were.
Sometimes religion is presented as something that's fixed and stable, whether you have to accept it or reject it. But the fact is that religious traditions, and certainly Christianity among them, is very diverse, very filled with possibilities. And we need to take responsibility for the kind of religion that we make.